Iran is now a part of BRICS, which means, this likely will throw us into World War III.
It showed that the FBI misused Fisa to conduct warrantless searches against U.S. citizens over 278,000 times.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. Before we dive into today's podcast, we just would like to give a shout out to Chantel. Chantel had ordered a sticker from us, and this was probably like a week ago, and something happened with our email, and we never got the order. And we are so grateful, Chantel, for your support. And we've got a package coming your way, but we just wanted to start off today's podcast by saying thank you so much. And anyone else who wants to order, we won't fuck up your order like we fucked up Chantel's.
We have some great Biden-inflation stickers that you can put wherever you want when you see inflation gone wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, we have to start off Monday morning with some bad news. Breaking news, actually. So Iran attacked Israel on Saturday with missiles and drones, and this was in retaliation from the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria that killed 7 members of the Revolutionary Guard on April 1st. And 2 of those people were generals. I know we mentioned it in a previous episode. So everyone was kind of anticipating, Iran's response to this. Well, Israel intercepted hundreds of drones, almost all of them. Surprisingly, there have been no deaths in Israel from this attack. I saw Benny Johnson posted what he called the doomsday plane that had left Israel, presumably with Netanyahu and his cabinet members, like as this was all unfolding. And then all of their flights were grounded. And I pretty much was just listening to commentary on Newsmax. They had a whole bunch of foreign affair experts on. They were going live while this was taking place. And I really liked it because it was people with all different perspectives. So I felt like I was able to get a good grasp on the situation and just what everyone, where everyone's thoughts were around it. And so one of the experts asked the question, like, why does Iran feel so confident in this barrage of missiles and drones when Israel is clearly more militarily armed? And what he thought was that this could be a sign that maybe they do have the backing of Russia and China. And I think it's a question that we all need to be asking ourselves because of BRICS. And then the other major concern is that here in the United States, we've had millions of illegals cross the border, and we have no way of knowing how many Iranians. Like, we know they've caught people on the terrorist watch list, but there's no way they could catch everyone. And so a lot of the experts that came on were saying, like, it's not if, it's just a question of like how many and where they all are across the United States. So anyhow, the East Coast of the United States was put on high alert because of this. But the experts were like, that's ridiculous. The entire country should be on high alert, knowing that there are sleeper cells here, and they could be anywhere. They could be in any state, any town, because we know that they spread out across the United States when they cross the border. And I don't even really know what to say. Like, my thoughts are still all over the place, but all I can say is that we know for a fact this didn't happen under Trump. And it didn't happen under Trump for a reason, because he was strong and he let our enemies around the world know what the consequence would be of something like this. But now we have to experience what happens when you have a weak president like Joe Biden. And I saw a lot of people on X reposting Trump's message from 2018 that said, quote, to Iranian President Rouhani, never, never threaten the United States again, or you will suffer the consequences, the like of which few throughout history have suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious, exclamation point. So, what I wouldn't give, Tara, to have a president like that again. I mean, a lot of people didn't like that about him, but guess what? It kept our enemies at bay. So, I want to contrast that with Biden's post after the Iran strike on Israel. He posted, quote, I just met with my national security team for an update on Iran's attacks against Israel. Our commitment to Israel's security against threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad, end quote. Wow, that sounds so intimidating, Tara. Like, I am sure that Iran is so worried right now after reading that. I mean, it's just a joke. Like, Biden was at his beach house in the morning. Then he called a lid at 5 o'clock, meaning nothing else will be coming out for the day. It's like we are literally on the verge of World War III, and he doesn't address the nation or the press, and he calls it a day at 5 p.m. Unbelievable.
Well, Stephanie, I mean, he's an old man and they had to drag him back from the beach. Like, I'm sure he was tired and he just wanted to get back to vacation. And at this point, do you expect any different from this man? Because I
No.
don't. And I want to point out that before the attack on Friday, he did that fucking thing again where he scolded Iran and just said, don't. And like, that this is the White House trying to make him seem fierce. Like the threat of one word from Biden is powerful enough to stop Iran, which, like, that's a fucking joke. They don't respect him. Nobody respect him. Like, contrast don't with Trump's statement that you just read. Huge fucking difference there. And consider the statements that Iran made before the attack. So I was reading in The Guardian, a member of the Iranian parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission said, quote, after punishing the Zionist regime in the coming hours, this villain will understand that henceforth, wherever in the world it attempts to assassinate figures of the resistance front, it will again be punished with Iranian missiles, end quote. And then similar statements were made by Ayatollah Khamenei, who gave a televised speech on Wednesday and said, quote, when they attacked our consulate area, it was like they attacked our territory. The evil regime must be punished and it will be punished, end quote. And to me, this is just like when Netanyahu gave threats against Hamas when they first attacked back in October. And what has Israel been doing since then? They've been following through on their promise to fucking annihilate and destroy Hamas. And now we've got Iran following through on their threats as well. Because despite whether we agree with what's happening or not, these are strong leaders for their countries and they fight back when they're attacked. What are we doing? Like before the attack, Biden gave a speech on Friday and he said, quote, we are devoted to the defense of Israel. We will support Israel. We will help defend Israel and Iran will not succeed, end quote. So to his credit, the U.S. military did move aircraft and ballistic missile defense destroyers to Israel last week. And during the attack, U.S. forces reportedly intercepted more than 70 drones and at least 3 ballistic missiles, and our fighter jets definitely helped to defend Iran. But then after this attack on Saturday, Biden tells Netanyahu that the U.S. is not going to engage in any kind of counteroffensive against Iran, and it's a, quote, win for Israel. Because, yay, like we helped out, and according to Biden, nothing of, quote, value was hit. So if, let's say, a country, Iran, Russia, China, whomever, attacks the United States and nothing of value is hit, are we just going to call it a day? And at this point, why would our allies believe in anything that we say? Like, why would they believe us to back them? Are we, quote, devoted to the defense of Israel, end quote, or not? I mean, to be honest, we're not devoted to the defense of our own country at this point. And it seems to me like the only thing we're devoted to is the defense of Ukraine. And we're recording this on Sunday for a Monday morning release. Biden is supposed to be meeting with the G7 leaders today, and their goal is to coordinate a united diplomatic response to Iran's attack on Israel. And on one hand, like, I sure as fuck don't want to be involved in World War III. Stephanie, I know you don't. I imagine most of America doesn't. But on the other hand, I really wish we had a strong leader in our country because, like you said, if Trump was in office, we wouldn't even be in this situation in the first place.
Yeah, this president, this entire administration is a fucking joke, and the whole world is laughing. And I am sure that the military industrial complex is pushing for us to get involved. But if we do, like, that's when World War III breaks out. I mean, I guess we're already involved because, like you said, the US, is helping to intercept things. Jordan as well in the UK. We're helping to intercept missiles and take down drones. But I think that most Americans are in a place where they just don't have an appetite for war and want us to stay the fuck out of it. And just like you said, we're not even protecting our own border. So people really don't want us to lose lives protecting someone else's border. And I don't know. I think that since Israel killed these Iranians at the consulate without consulting their biggest ally, the United States, then they shouldn't expect their ally to come to the rescue. That's my personal opinion. But you have people like Alan Dershowitz saying that, well, this is an opportunity for Israel and the US to get rid of the Ayatollahs and get rid of their nuclear arsenal and make regime change happen in Iran. And I'm sure the Uniparty, both Democrats and Republicans, as well as the military industrial complex, are salivating over this. Like,
Mhm.
that is the most likely scenario where we're headed now. And, Israel's probably going to go light up Iran just like they did, Gaza. But I just want to point out that this is not the same world that it was just a few years ago. Iran is now a part of BRICS, which means, this likely will throw us into World War III. And now we have this new threat domestically with sleeper cells due to Biden's wide open border. So this isn't some far off war in a faraway land. Like, we're going to see attacks here in the United States, most likely from these people that are already living here. And so forcing regime change, may have been something that we did years ago and we got away with it. But in today's world, and when, like you said, we have Biden and his weak leadership, I don't know that that's something we want to do. It's really concerning. And he's like the worst person to be in charge of our country at a time like this.
Well, according to him, he's helping and everyone respects him and he's
Yeah,
calling the
right.
shots. So it's just a fucking joke. But I guess we'll see what happens, what comes out of this conference on Sunday, and if Iran attacks again, or what Israel does, or what we do. It's all up in the air.
Well, yeah, and it's going to be interesting too because he's already like walking on eggshells with most of his party, or at
Yeah.
least his constituents, not wanting, any further attacks in Gaza. So they're going to be against this. So he's like walking a fine line. But then again, like, this would be the perfect scenario in an election year to have a war break out that interferes with the election or postpones the election, like, I'm sure they will use that to their advantage. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I mean, this is not good news. Nobody wants a world war. And
No.
that's like exactly where we're headed.
Yeah. And it's pretty scary. But let's move on. Let's
Yes,
move
please.
on. Let's move on to something that I'm going to call What the fuck is up with Mike Johnson? And let's talk about some developments over the last few weeks that are causing like chaos and dissent in the House. So, first of all, it seems like Congress wants to continue allowing the FBI to spy on Americans because on Friday, the House voted to reauthorize Fisa. Now, that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And if you guys remember, this was a center of controversy last year for reports of abuse by the FBI using Fisa to spy on American citizens. It still has to pass in the Senate, and I guess the deadline for its expiration is April 19th. But it seems to me like that's going to be a no-brainer because we already know the left is, for the most part, in favor of spying on Americans under the guise of, quote, protecting democracy, aka adding another tool to their totalitarian arsenal. And I think we covered this last year when the report initially came out. But as a reminder, it showed that the FBI misused FISA to conduct warrantless searches against US citizens over 278,000 times between 2020 and 2021. Hmm. Right in the middle of COVID and Biden's push to categorize patriotic Americans as domestic terrorists, right? How weird. And I was reading an article in American Military News, and they said, quote, The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court filing showed that the improper searches included surveillance efforts against Americans involved in the Capitol Hill protest on January 6th, Black Lives Matter protests involved in the 2020 George Floyd riots, and thousands of people who donated to a failed congressional candidate, end quote. And reportedly, it was something like 19,000 donors that were flagged for donating to this campaign that was supposedly the target of foreign influence, but then like, oopsie, the FBI later determined that their query parameters were off and the whole thing was an error. So last week, it was predicted that House Republicans would kill the FISA reauthorization, especially like with the Freedom Caucus, which they want nothing to do with this. But then there was this push by House Speaker Mike Johnson, and the tides turned. And specifically, most of the controversy was over Section 702. And this section allows the government to surveil non-Americans living abroad. But in doing so, the government at the same time intercepts incoming communication from Americans who are interacting with the foreigners being spied on, allegedly. Now, here's what's interesting to me. Mike Johnson was initially a huge critic of FISA and especially the FBI. He has referred to the FBI on more than one occasion as a political tool being used by the Biden administration. And now suddenly he's supporting FISA. Why? So I saw this article in The Hill, and he told reporters, quote, "When I was a member of the judiciary, I saw all of the abuses of the FBI. There were terrible abuses over and over and over. And then when I became speaker, I went to SCIF, which is Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, and got the confidential briefing from sort of the other perspective on that to understand the necessity of Section 702 of FISA and how important it is for national security. And it gave me a different perspective," end quote. So does Mike Johnson know something that the rest of Congress doesn't know? Is he in a position where he's being threatened to make this change of heart? I want to play a clip from an interview that Marjorie Taylor Greene did on Steve Bannon's podcast. And it was on Friday, like before they had the vote.
Oh, they're trying to instill fear in members, especially like our own speaker, Mike Johnson. They pull him in the room in a classified briefing and give him no proof, but try to tell him that Americans are going to die unless you reauthorize FISA, or people are going to die unless you do X, Y, Z. Here's the deal. I am completely against FISA, Steve. Kill FISA altogether. We do not need FISA. FISA is the tool of the deep state. And just because people think taking it from a 5-year to a 2-year makes this bill any better, it does not. Here's the deal. There's a carve out for members of Congress in there, Steve. That means that Congress has to be notified if a congressman is going to be spied on by FISA, but yet are the American people notified? No, absolutely not. FISA is what was used to spy on the Trump campaign. It's what's been used to spy on hundreds of thousands of Americans, and the intel community wants it to continue. So my question for everyone at home is, do you trust the government? Do you actually trust the Department of Justice to police itself? Do you actually trust Biden's DOJ to hold Biden's FBI accountable? No, we don't trust any of it. And I'm really sick and tired of Republicans here in the House kicking the can down the road and saying, oh, well, when Trump comes back, Trump will fix it. Why don't Republicans fix it right now? That's what I want to see. I want to see a fight to actually do what we say we're going to do and stand up for the American people. I voted yes on the rule. I'm voting yes on the warrant requirement, and then I am voting a big fat no on the FISA bill altogether. And that's exactly what we should be doing.
Okay, so when she was referring to the amendment, that was the other big part of this FISA consideration. And Andy Biggs, the rep from Arizona, he introduced an amendment that would have added warrant requirements whenever U.S. citizens are like in question with FISA. But Mike Johnson was pushing hard for the bill without the warrant requirement. And he told reporters, quote, "We are enacting sweeping changes, over 50 reforms, 56 to be exact, to the program that are in the base text that will stop the abuse of politicized FBI queries. We can't allow a critical tool like this to just expire and go out of use. So we think the House will take the right steps," end quote. And I guess the House, quote, took the right steps because the amendment ended up failing in Congress on Friday in a 212 to 212 tie. So who was the deciding vote? According to conservatives in Congress, it was Mike Johnson as the tiebreaker. Representative Chip Roy from Texas said, quote, what we ended up with as a bill that didn't have the warrant protections in the bill. It was going to be forced to be added by an amendment. And then the Speaker of the House put his finger on the scale against the amendment. And that pretty much is the story. So in the end, the House voted 273 to 147 to reauthorize Section 702 of Fisa for 2 years instead of 5 years. Now, am I in agreement with Fisa as a legitimate program for counterterrorism to identify actual threats and protect Americans as it was originally intended for? Absolutely. And especially now that we have this untold number of terrorists who have entered our country through our open border over the past 3 years, along with all of these threats of cyber attacks and like threats from Russia and China and whomever else. I think counterterrorism efforts are like absolutely needed now more than ever. But at the same time, we all know that the FBI and the DOJ have been completely weaponized by the Biden admin, and I just don't trust that this won't be used again as a means of spying on non-criminal American citizens who go against the narrative. Like, what do you think, Stephanie?
Like us, like
Yes,
non-criminal American
exactly.
citizens. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about it though. It's like the agency that spies on Americans likely spied on Mike Johnson and found some dirt on him. Like I have no faith whatsoever that there's some type of like shady blackmail or threats being made by this administration against Johnson. And with that being said, though, Johnson, did say when he became speaker that he was going to work to unite the two parties, meaning like he would seek middle ground. So maybe he's doing this for like political reasons to gain trust. I don't know. But I mean, I lost faith a long time ago in Congress to get anything done for the American people. So I'm not really surprised there. I think that the Uniparty has such a stronghold on them that I'm not surprised if they did get Mike Johnson. But my new favorite rep, Anna Paulina Luna from Florida, did call a procedural vote on like the overall FISA bill, which means that they're going to vote on it again today. Now, likely nothing will change. It'll probably still be the same exact outcome, but you never know. I mean, I guess it was just a way for them to delay it. So they'll be voting again today for whatever reason.
Yeah, and here's what I also find interesting. Like Trump is defending and supporting Mike Johnson, which is weird because Trump recently said that House Republicans need to kill the FISA bill. But now he's supporting it. And like Mike Johnson even went to Mar-a-Lago this past weekend to have some kind of election integrity event with Trump.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like I hadn't heard that. All I heard was that Trump said to kill the bill. So I'm thinking there has to be something behind the scenes that we aren't seeing. Like maybe it's a strategy in an election year to appeal to a wider range of people. Maybe he's planning on using this just like the Democrats did to go after people that went after him. Um, and we got to remember, like, this was used to get Trump during the whole Russiagate thing. Like, they spied on him and his campaign. So I really don't think there's any way he'd go along with it if there wasn't some type of strategic advantage to it. The one thing I was thinking is like maybe this is what he plans to use to find and deport all the people that got into the country illegally. And I'm assuming, at the time of this, they all had the information that Iran was going to attack Israel. So, like, maybe they are going to need this in order to catch these sleeper cells that have crossed the border. Like, that could play into it. But I would just have to think there's like something bigger that we're not seeing here.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think it definitely, for its intended use, is a fantastic tool. But for what it has been used for against the American people, is totally fucked up. And just as a side note, like my mom said she watched Trump and Mike Johnson live from Mar-a-Lago on Saturday night. I didn't watch it, so I can't comment on it, but she said that Mike Johnson had no passion when he was speaking. And she sent me a text this morning and she's like, no wonder he can be bought.
Yeah, and I saw this clip going around on TikTok where he was talking about people who cross the border illegally, and he said hardened criminals, and like as he said it, he pointed to Trump, and everyone's like, "What the fuck was that about?" So like I don't know what is going on with this guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's now a part of the Uniparty.
Okay, well, speaking of that, I've got more. So let's talk about Ukraine. What about aid to Ukraine? Because this is something that Mike Johnson has vocally been adamantly opposed to in the past, at least in terms of not giving money to Ukraine without funding our border first. Well, when was all this coming to a head? Back in September. We haven't seen any bill come through since then. Congress still hasn't come to a decision on what the next aid package will be for Ukraine. I was reading in Business Insider that they're speculating the House keeps stalling on this aid plan because of Marjorie Taylor Greene's threat to oust him from leadership. And last week, we played a clip from an interview that she did with Tucker. And I want to play another clip from that same interview. So this is a couple weeks old, but it kind of answers the question, what the fuck is going on with Mike Johnson? Because it's not just Fisa where he's backpedaling.
Not murdering more Ukrainians and more Russians. This needs to end. But no, Mike Johnson has made a complete departure of who he is and what he stands for, and to the point where people are literally asking, is he blackmailed? What is wrong with him? Because he's completely disconnected with what we want.
Do you think he is being blackmailed?
I have no idea. I can't comprehend, Tucker, what radically changes a man. I mean, if we break down the second part of basically an omnibus, let's break that down. So Mike Johnson is pro-life. In the second part of the omnibus, just less than 2 weeks ago, he funded full-term abortion clinics. Full-term abortion clinics. He funded the trans agenda on children. I mean, how does that even happen from a Christian conservative Republican speaker? He did nothing for the southern border, did nothing to secure the border. And this comes on the heels of Laken Riley being brutally murdered. This came on the heels of a video that was running on loop on social media where illegal aliens had rushed our border, ran over Texas National Guard, ran over Border Patrol agents in order to invade our country. These were military-aged men, by the way. He did nothing to secure a border. It's the number one issue in the world. He completely changed who he was, funded the FBI, gave him a brand new building, fully funded the Department of Justice that is persecuting everyone on the right and actually targeting our presidential candidate for election this year, literally trying to put him in jail the rest of his life. We don't know who Mike Johnson is anymore, so there's I can't comprehend it.
I can't comprehend it either, but
It's got to be blackmail.
it's got to be, right? And here's something else. And this is like a little scary to me because I feel like this could really spiral us into a major financial crisis. So reportedly, Mike Johnson is in conversations with the White House to figure out if it's possible to use, sorry, hold on.
You okay?
Yeah, I have my window open and they're burning leaves in the yard next door.
Oh.
And the smoke's coming through my window and I just got a huge mouthful of it. I'm
Ugh.
so sorry. Anyway, trying to figure out if it's possible to use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. So I was reading this in AP News and in multiple other outlets. There's bipartisan legislation called the Rebuilding Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for Ukrainians Act. And what this would do would be use confiscated assets from the Russian central bank. And this goes back to 2 years ago when the US and I think the G7 froze around 300 billion of foreign holdings in Russian central bank money after Russia invaded Ukraine. And since then, the money's just been sitting there. So now this idea is to use this money to fund Ukraine. But this is a super sketchy move because it would further fuck up the standing of the US dollar on the global stage and it would require like lengthy legal procedures and a court decision. So, according to Sergei Alexshenko, he's a former Russian central banker who's now a dissident and member of the Russian anti-war committee. He said, quote, "There is no legal basis to confiscate Russian assets, and if it is done by the decision of the administration, that means there's no rule of law in the United States and no protection of private property," end quote. He then talked about how if the Biden admin decides to confiscate Russian assets, it could prompt nations like China, which is the biggest holder of US treasuries, to basically determine that it's not safe to keep its reserves in US dollars. And you have some EU countries that have also frozen Russian assets, but they haven't gone any further because they're worried that if they do anything more than just confiscate the money, it could completely destabilize the global financial system. So, Stephanie, don't you think this would just strengthen BRICS?
Yeah, or it could be a way to launch a global digital currency and one world new order or whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
and I'm just thinking like logically, we have to say fuck you to Ukraine because now this whole thing with Israel and Iran, like we need the money ourselves. We need to strengthen our own military and borders and help Israel, whatever. But they're going to flip it around and they're going to be like, well, since there's BRICS, like we need more funding in Ukraine to defend, ward off Russia from invading into Europe. And like they're totally going to use this to their advantage to basically screw over the American taxpayers because we're the ones paying for this. We're the ones funding this bullshit. So it's just crazy. And like, yeah, I have to say, after you laid everything out with Mike Johnson, it sure seems like the uniparty elites got to him. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know what else could have possibly happened to make him change so drastically. But it's like, how much more are we gonna poke the bear until World War III breaks out? Like now they're gonna
right.
go and like mess with this. Are you kidding me? With the Iran attack on Israel, it's like we need to stay out of it. We need to just like stay out of it, take care of America right now, because we're going to have our own very big problem very soon if this path continues, which it most certainly will. I mean, it's already there. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this is such a bad topic to start the week on, but I think it's important too that people understand. And we have to think there were a lot of Republicans that are going along with this bullshit. So,
Hmm.
everyone that's listening, I think you need to know who your congressperson is and reach out to them. It's very easy. You go online and like you can get all of their information to call them, to send emails. My mom and I were just talking about that because there's like reps in Florida that are like great and they're constantly informing us of like what they voted for, why, all this. And then our rep in this area, like we never hear anything. And so we're like, we need to vote her out. And I think everyone needs to pay attention to that. Like, obviously, um, you know, people are thinking about the presidential election, but we need to start paying attention to who our local representatives are and do something about it because the uniparty is real and it's really scaring me. I mean, I think we're going to break into World War III at any moment. So, I don't know, I
I
feel
think
like I
it's
just
like,
rambled, but I'm nervous about
no,
this.
I think it's almost unavoidable at this point because it doesn't look like the Israel conflict is gonna go away anytime soon. And now there's this involvement with Iran that will probably only escalate. Putin's not going to stop with Ukraine. We're just going to keep sending them money and military equipment. And then what happens if Ukraine gets voted into NATO? I mean, like, we're just setting up World War III. And then we have our government saying, oh, yeah, Ukraine will be in NATO very soon. So, like, we're fucked. And then China. And I mean, it's just from all sides. And people in the United States have been so insulated against anything like this. And it seems like everything is outside our borders, but it's not because all these motherfuckers have crossed our border into our country. And like you said earlier, these sleeper cells are there and some shit's going to go down. And it's probably going to be sooner rather than later. Happy
Yeah.
Monday.
Happy Monday, everyone. Damn. And I just want to stress that Joe Biden is to blame. None of this would have happened under Trump. I can
Nope.
assure you of that.
Yep.
All right. Well, happy Monday. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here on Wednesday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.